my boss, who was also my best friend from age 6, had a house on, or had a lot. His grandfather had a lot on East Lake. It's where Newtons live now, and there's a little gazebo out there. And as little kids, we used to come out and canoe and just mess around on the lake. And then he sold it to Gary Newton, is his brother-in-law. So he sold the lot to Gary because he lived further down on East Lake. And it's a long story, but his parents owned a beautiful old home on North Fillmore, and kind of out of sync with the neighborhood. And they wanted to sell it, moved to Florida, couldn't sell it. So his dad told Joe, he said, that was my boss, Joe Meyer. He said, Joe, you're buying it. So Joe bought that house and lived there till he died. His widow still owns it, so it's a beautiful house too. But Joe kept the lot, and he had some fantastic 4th of July parties on that lot for years. They were phenomenal. He'd go out and buy thousands of dollars worth of fireworks and blow them off his dock, and we had bottle rocket wars with the people across the cove. So anyway, that was my first experience. And then when I guess when I hit 7th grade or so, I had a good friend that lived out here. And apparently we had a pretty mild spring that year, so he had a little John boat. We were swimming in March, and we took a little piece of plywood and just cut it in a V and tied a rope to the back of the boat, and we were surfing until you got it was just a board, so as soon as you got the point down in the water, it just dove. So anyway, we did that for years, and then we would boat down to a family that lived on Park Drive, the Watsons. And they had a trampoline in their backyard, and it was a big gathering place for all the kids out here. So we'd hang out there. Dunlap Lake was always a great place for me. And my wife moved here from Chicago, and she loved the water. And so we got married. We bought our first house way out on Randall Street, about near the Woodlawn Cemetery. And we were there. We had our first child there, and it was a very small house. And then we got pregnant with our second child, and we needed more room. And Bob Coltis had his house for sale. His wife, Bob Hutz's mother, had MS, I think, and it's a 2-level house, and she couldn't get around very well. So they bought another house out on East Lake Drive, which was a 1-story ranch, and he had it for sale for a while, and it was 3 lots. It was originally 3 lots. The house was on 2 lots, and then there was a vacant lot. And it was just a little out of our budget, and we desperately wanted it. We thought about building, but we didn't have much time. My wife was already pregnant. So Bob decided to chop the 1 lot off and lowered the price, and it was in our price range. And so I told Bob, well, I got to sell my house first. And Bob said, oh, where do you live? And he said, well, maybe we can work out a trade. So he took my house out on Randall in trade on his house on Barnett, and then I think one of his kids lived in it for a while, and then he used it for rental property, and then they finally sold it. But it all kind of came together for us to live on the lake. So that was we moved in July of '83, and my second child was born in October. So that's what started it for us. Well, I mean, historically, I guess it was Major Dunlap dammed up the creek and built the lake. And like I said, for years, it was just a kind of a getaway for a lot of people in town. And then it just grew from there. And it was, actually, there's been quite a bit of new construction, and lately they've even started to do tear downs on houses that are here and rebuild something else on the lots. But I think it really kind of blew up, so to speak, when it was annexed into the city. Because prior to that, everybody that had a house at the time was on a septic system, and they were pulling their water out of the lake and running it through a sand filter. And the lake was pretty dirty for a while. And I think that happened about 75, and then they put in sewers and water everywhere. And that's when it became part of the city. And I think that made a big difference to a lot of people. And over the next several years, the lake really cleaned up just by sewer, just by everybody being on a sewer rather than septic systems that tend over time to leach, and so, and it had already been done. I think they finished it maybe 1977, if I'm not mistaken. That's about as accurate as I can be on it. So, and then, like I said, we moved here in '83, so everything was already in, and that's when I think that's when it really exploded. It became much more popular when it was part of the city, and you had city services and took care of the streets and roads, and that made a difference. My earliest memories, well, we had a almost 3-year-old when we moved out here, and then we had 2 more kids while we were out here. So we just, the first year we didn't have a boat, and then that was when my boss had to buy his dad's house, and he had a boat. I bought his boat. So then we started boating everywhere, and it was just, life was idyllic for us. We loved living on the water. We were both water people. As a kid, I was a little bit of swim team, mostly a dive team. So I was always at a pool or out here. But I loved the lake. And even when I had access to a swimming pool, a lot of my friends didn't. And we'd come out here and trespass and swim. And I had an interesting story about that. So Ora Jane, who lived where I live, had those lots. And then her brother, who was the major's son, he had the point at the end of Cottage Drive, where there's like 3 houses now. He owned that whole point. And there was a great big tree with a really terrific rope swing. So everybody was trespassing and swimming out there. So I was out there with some friends one time, and somebody came out and ran us off and said, "You can't be out here unless you have a guest pass." And so we left. So the next time I was at the pool, it turns out that Bob Dunlap married my dad's cousin, so Della. And so I was at the swimming Sunset Hills one day, and I thought, and they lived right across the road from the golf course. So I got dressed and walked across the golf course, and knocked on Bob's door, told him who I was, and I said, "I'd like to be able to swim on your lot if you'd let me, but I need a guest pass." He said, "Sure." So he gave me a guest pass. About 2 weeks later, my dad found out about it. He read me the riot act for going over and asking for that. So, but Bob gave me a guest pass, and so I was good to go as far as that was concerned. My friends might still get run off, but he had like I said, he had a great rope swing. You could really get way out. It was way up in a tree. So, and then I guess I don't know what the circumstances were, but Bob sold that lot or that area, and there's 3 pretty nice houses on it now. But he never did build out here as in my lifetime that I know of. Even when I was first here, you had to have if somebody was on your lot, they had to have a guest pass. I guess that went away. My brother-in-law fishes out here all the time, but it had to be signed, and actually they were supposed to be with the resident. It was all a convoluted thing, but it was a thing even when I was here. Well, like my family, I mean, my kids. In fact, my children have all told us when we die, we're not allowed to sell our house, or we're not allowed to sell our house because they want to keep it as their summer vacation place. So I have one daughter that lives here in town, and then my middle daughter lives in Kansas, and my son lives in Colorado. So, but they all still love to come back to the lake. Now they have kids. The 2 that are out of town have kids. So the first thing they want to do is get out on the boat and have their kids swim, mess around in the lake, just like they did when they grew up. Like I said, Chris was almost 3, and my other two kids were born out here, so they were water people as soon as they were born. So it's been a great life. Like I said, it's been a great life for us. If I had to live anywhere else, I would be hesitant to leave. Certainly, the birth of my children was a big one, and the expansion of my family. And I was on the board at one point, so we've been through restrictions, and lowering the lake was always a kind of a dilemma. You never knew if something would get caught in that door, and you couldn't get it shut, the gate, and you couldn't get it shut, and that would be a bad thing. But nothing's really been life-changing other than being here. No big events other than my kids, of course. Well, Edwardsville, I grew up in Edwardsville, and when I was a kid, Edwardsville had a population of about 8,000 people, maybe 10. And so it's just exploded over the last 20 years. So that's changed the scope of Edwardsville. We had to go somewhere to shop, to do like any of the home improvement places at the time. There was no Home Depot or Lowe's, but there was Central Hardware in Fairview Heights, and that was the only place you could get a lot of stuff. We had Griggy Hardware, of course, in town. And I'm not too sure that the expansion of Edwardsville was a great thing to me. A lot of people think it was, but Edwardsville was a 2-lane, 159 was a 2-lane road that went all the way. It actually ended at, I guess, what's the Heighton building, which was the little brick building right before Kohl's, and that was originally built as a restaurant. And that was pretty much where Edwardsville ended. Everything else beyond that was vacant, other than the nursery where they've just now started construction. And I guess the granary was out there. Do you know about the granary? Well, where the Quick Trip was a granary. It was a storage granary for farmers. And I guess they abandoned it or whatever, and somebody bought it and turned it into a bar. And it was a multi-level, and it was huge. And that happened, I think, about the time Illinois lowered the drinking age to 18 for a brief period of time. And that place went crazy. It was packed every night. And they had bands, and it just kind of went away then. And the Quick Trip bought them out and tore it down and built their building. And then I think maybe everything may be back to where the Lewis and Clark library system is, or I don't think that's what they call it anymore. It's Heartland or something now. But all that was part of the granary property. It was huge. You could get lost in there practically. I think probably one of the more fun things that we did was my boss Joe Meyer's 4th of July party. It was all of his friends and relatives, and that little lot, it was kind of narrow and long along the shoreline. There'd be 100 people there, 150 people. It was just a picnic. He had grilled burgers and hot dogs. And then when it got dark, he'd bring out a music system, and he'd play Star Spangled Banner and Yankee Doodle Dandy and all the patriotic songs, and he'd shoot off fireworks. I'd shoot off fireworks. A couple of his friends also worked for him, so we would set out he had a dock that went out like that, and we'd set the fireworks off from the dock, and he had some pretty nice stuff, some mortars. He had mortars that go up and explode. Those were always fun. And then I think Maureen and I talked about this when we were at the Moose the other night. We worked our office was at the corner of Hillsborough and St. Andrews, right across from the store. So one night a week we decided we'd go out to Joe's Lake lot and just have a barbecue. We just get someplace to let the kids run wild and swim, and we'd barbecue and have a few beers, and then a couple of us had boats, and so we'd go out and take a couple of cruises around the lake. But it was, we all had kids, so about the time it got dark, or maybe a little after, then we'd all break up and go home. But we did that every week, once a week. for a long time, and then kids started getting involved in Little League and soccer, and we couldn't all find a night to do it. It just kind of fell apart. So we still use Joe's Lot all the time, but we didn't have the organized picnic once a week. And it was great. Like I said, we'd have a few beers, and the kids they could run up and around and jump in the lake. We had threw all our flotation devices leave them in the gazebo out there. We were there every week, and we used the gazebo quite a bit. We had a monthly poker game out there for a while, for many years actually. So a bunch of Joe's friends, we would play cards every month from about probably maybe March, certainly April, till it got too cold to do it because there's no heat in there. So maybe November. Once a month we played cards, and then we would draw money out of every pot, throw it in a kitty, and then we'd buy our beer. We'd buy a bunch of beer for that, and then go out and stock up the refrigerator. So you didn't have to bring your own beer, and you could just get to the fridge and pop one open, and we'd play cards. It was great for me because I'd take my boat all the time, and I never had to worry about getting home then because I just take the boat down the lake. I think Joe was the president of the board then, and he found this company, or they found him. They said they would dredge the lake if they could have the lead. So they were supposed to dig the lead out and then dredge some of the south end. They dredged a lot of the lead out, but they never did the dredging like they were supposed to. But they dug a lot of the lead out. I don't know how many cubic yards they took, but it was a lot. That was, I guess, mid to late 80s, mid 80s. So from 37, 39, whatever the gun club was open, until mid 80s, they shot out over the lake all those years, 2 or 3 times a week. So there was a lot of lead in it. Some people won't like this. You might not like it yourself, but if I were to tell anybody if they wanted to move onto the lake, I would say, get a house on the lake. Sorry, but that's the key to it, as far as I'm concerned. If you're going to live on a lake, you got to live on a lake. It's like your backyard is a 120-acre lake. It's great. You do have access if you live across the street, obviously, but it's just not quite the same. Obviously, the dredging is a huge part of what the future holds for the lake. So I've been in favor of all the proposals that they've put forth, and I've told people who objected to it. I said, you know what? I don't really care whether you dredge it or not. From my personal perspective, because where I live, I'll be long dead and gone before that ever silts in. I mean, I'm all the way down by the dam practically. So, but it's important to me as a part lake owner, really, for that south end to get cleaned up. I mean, I have friends that live down there, and they complain all the time. I mean, you could walk across the lake when it's full. And it's deep. It's really deep, the silt in that. I think I put a lot of the blame on that on some of the builders out here that didn't do their proper due diligence to keep the topsoil out of our lake when they were building all these subdivisions. And it really makes me a little angry that they made all the money building all those houses, and we foot the bill to dredge it, get it out of there. So that's significant. As far as Edwardsville goes, I think Edwardsville is not going to stop growing at this point. It's a dam that's broken, and I don't think you can stop it at this point. It's a great place to live, and it always has been. Edwardsville was always kind of a bedroom community. As I like to say, the captains of industry lived here. And all the executives from Granite City Steel and the refineries. In fact, that's why my wife moved here. She moved here in 1968, and her father moved here to take over running the Clark oil refinery in Hartford. He was a chemical engineer, and he had worked for Clark Oil in Blue Island, Illinois. They bought that refinery from Sinclair and turned it into Clark Oil, and he moved down here to be the plant manager. So, and that's when we got together. I can't really think of anything. I mean, we all enjoy the lake. We all love it, and it's very important that we do what we can to get it cleaned up down there so that it's good for everybody that lives on the lake. I can get all the way around with their boats. It's pretty shallow down there for boats even.